So you may recognize this bag. Some of you may have received one of these for your bar mitzvahs many years ago. This happens to be Rich Spitzer's bar mitzvah set of tefillin. When you put on tefillin, there's a little black box at the center of the straps. Pull them out. Usually not done on Rosh Hashana or Yom Kippur or any holidays, but done weekly, during the week. And one box goes between the eyes on the forehead, and the other goes on the arm. And we're instructed to say 3 blessings. So this goes on the head, you can see that. So ready for the head, the little covering comes off, this is what it looks like. You know these are from some of these bar mitzvah long ago because the leather is coming apart. They need to be cared for a little bit. First, you put on the arm, which is this one, but you don't wrap it, and you say a blessing. Then you put on the head one, and then you say another blessing, and it sits right here because in Shema it says, "V'totafot beinecha," a sign, a symbol between your eyes. And then the third blessing, the third piece of text that you say is as you wrap the straps around your arm 7 times to represent the 7 days of creation, the number of completion, our connection to the world. The lines are, "Ve'eristich li le'olam," I will betroth you to me forever. "Ve'eristich li b'tzedek uve'mishpat uve'chesed uve'rachamim," I will betroth you to me in righteousness, in justice, in loving kindness, and compassion. "Ve'eristich li be'emunah v'yadat et Adonai," I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the eternal. So these words, by the way, are in the feminine construct because these are marriage vows. Sounds kind of like it, right? These words are from Hosea, from one of the prophets, and a passage where God talks about renewing God's relationship with Israel like a marriage covenant. Now, as you know, God's relationship with Israel is fraught at best in much of the Torah. The people forget about God basically immediately. But these words are intimate and sacred. And at a Jewish wedding, perhaps you've seen people walk in circles. Perhaps you've done them. You are binding yourself to your partner, as God is bound to us, and we are bound to God. And does anybody remember what's in this black box, by the way? Oh, Shema and V'ahavta. Yeah, Shema and V'ahavta are in here. And in the Shema, it not only says, but Totafot beinecha, it says, Ukshartam leot al yadecha, place them, bind them as a sign upon your hand. Just like the mezuzah on your door, where it says, put it on your doorpost. This is our attempt to fill in mezuzot, all our attempts at doing what it says in Shema. The binding here represents our devotion and our relationship to God and the words of God's promise to us. Now, there are bindings that we choose, like tefillin, like marriage, like love, like relationships. And there are bindings we don't, like trauma, fear, silence. And both of these types of bindings, these sort of good and bad, or these maybe negative and positive things, live inside the Jewish experience. So on the first day of Rosh Hashana, which is today, the Torah portion that we just read is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. That was read beautifully, by the way. You might remember that Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. 100 years old. They waited so long to have a child. So this moment of this binding of Isaac, Abraham was at least 120. right? People often think of this story as, oh, Isaac was a young child. He was a baby, or 3, 4, or whatever. It took him up the mountain. No. In the Hebrew, it says na'ar, which means young adult man. Right? So this means that if we just think about physically, this young adult man could be anywhere from, 15 to 25, 30, right? And he could easily overpower his father, who was, somewhere in the 120-year-old range at that point. Right? Abraham takes and Isaac is his favorite child, and without consulting Sarah, Abraham takes his favorite child, Isaac, up the mountain, and Isaac asks, "Where's the ram for the sacrifice?" And Abraham says, "Don't worry, it's going to be fine. It's going to come." I don't know, maybe Isaac knew what was happening. And perhaps he figured there was never going to be a ram. Or maybe he didn't see what was coming and he was just walking along, going on a hike with his dad early in the morning. Maybe he was, holding his arm, supporting him. Hard to hike at 35. I don't know. Either way, there's no way that Isaac allowed himself to be tied to the altar and a knife to be lifted above him. He allowed his life to be on the line before the messengers of God intervened and told Abraham not to do this. So according to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, a midrash, which was a commentary written around the 2nd century-ish, Isaac was a willing participant in his own binding. Abraham was elderly. Isaac could have stopped him. We could perhaps say that Isaac was quite literally in a bind. I've been thinking about this moment with Isaac a lot. Not just because I've been working with our Torah chanters to learn how to chant it, but also because I'm curious as to what it means for us to be stuck, bound, and what it takes to unstick ourselves. I think we're all in a moment where we are all feeling bound. We're bound to our families, to our friends, to our jobs, to our lives, and of course, we are bound up by the larger world, by violence, by war, by pain, by constant news input, by our tiny pocket computers, by our brokenheartedness for the world and our society. The binding is holding us down. It's making us feel heavy. And we feel alone and lonely, tied down and waiting for the knife to drop. So if Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is correct, and Isaac was a willing participant in his own binding, it begs the question, what are we willing to be bound by? But when this binding feels so isolating and painful and limiting, where do we go from there? How can we possibly look from our place of being tied, being stuck, being held, and see all these other things happening to other people? You see, we see what we're stuck to. But one of the things we often feel stuck by and bound up by is all of the things that are binding others, all the things we can't control. It turns out, our tradition gives us an answer. Isn't that useful? I love that. Our answer is to bind ourselves to community. Another tie. Especially now, at a moment like this. To lean into our community, to help others, to tighten those ties even further. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love our neighbors as ourselves. We follow the example of God in Hosea. I will betroth you to me. So I'm going to do something a little dangerous now, which is to ask you, if you feel comfortable, to reflect on two things with somebody near you. I know, to ask a room full of Jews whose attention you're trying to, keep, and then to ask them to talk to each other, this is dangerous. I understand what I've asked. But I'm going to try. Here are my two questions. And if you're at home and you're watching, I invite you to reflect on this. You want to write, you want to say it out loud, you want to think about it. What is a moment in these two different types of binding for you? Number one, a time where a person came to help you in a moment where you were bound, which I hope brings you a little smile, a little light, and a little joy. And number two, think about a moment in which you helped to unbind someone else. How did you show up for someone? How did it feel? Did it lessen your own shame and guilt? Did it quiet the voices that are so loud and full of self-doubt? So I'm going to say, let's spend a minute or two hearing each other. This is an active listening activity. So if you feel comfortable and you'd like to turn to somebody that you came with or somebody that you don't know yet that you want to introduce yourself to, when is a moment that you have felt bound and somebody helped to unbind you? And when is a moment that you helped to unbind somebody else? I'm going to invite you to go ahead, turn to somebody, share a little bit. We'll come back together. You okay? You okay? Okay. Yeah, I know. Please make sure both people, that's not on. That's fine. Please make sure both people share. I did this because, number one, I want to remind you that your voices are important. What you have to say, what you've gone through, the things that you've experienced, your new connections, your old ones, they're important. And I want to remind you also that this is an experience that you can do not just today, this kind of reflection. Sitting down with somebody face to face and asking these sort of deeper, more serious questions is not something that we do often. We don't often take a pause to do this kind of work. I also want to share a moment in our community, because I didn't really get to share with anybody. So, well, Steve and I, we're sharing other stuff, but we're mostly jerks. One of the moments in which we were in a bind this past year is when our family with our family education program. And when the personnel change happened, you all stepped up. I started getting phone calls, one by one, text messages, emails. Rabbi, what can we do? How can we help? The education committee, Heidi Hirsch, bless her, parent volunteers, teachers, madrichim, all of the people who stepped up to help us in this bind. And we launched school. It was the community. A community made up of people who I know are carrying the heaviness of the world and of your individual fears and losses and families and societal expectations and lives. And yet, you called, you came, you showed up for each other, for the future of Judaism, for our future students. You bound yourselves to each other, and in doing so, released the binding. I understand this metaphor is a little complicated. You're with me. You released us from a situation that we were bound up in, from a stuck place. One of the things I think any B'nai Mitzvah student would tell you, and you can ask, there are several here today, that it always feels good to help people. We ask them to do these gemilut chasadim, these acts of loving kindness, these projects where they're doing something that they're passionate about and they're spending time helping somebody else. But one of the things that shows up in every speech is, I felt good helping. It feels good to help. It's not the reason that we do it, but we still reap the benefits of feeling good about ourselves. And if caring for others helps us feel good and a little more buoyant and a little more joyful, that helps to loosen the ties. We are all bound by something this year. And still we get to choose what binds us. We can bind ourselves, like it says, Eres tichli, l'tzedek, u'lemishpat, to compassion, to courage, to community, to one another. And in doing so, we unbind each other from despair, from aloneness, from the sense that we are stuck forever. May we bind ourselves this year in righteousness, in justice, in loving kindness, compassion. And may we unbind one another with courage, with presence, and with love, following God's example from Hosea. Bind you to me in righteousness, in justice, and in compassion. Shana Tova, everybody. Umetuka. May it be a year of good health, of blessings, of sweetness, of freedom, and community.
Amen.